Namaste. This is Yoga Therapy Podcast, and I'm your host, Shira Cohen, yoga teacher, yoga therapist, and Ayurvedic wellness educator. In these conversations with experts in the field of yoga therapy, you'll find out what it is and how it can help you and your loved ones to reclaim well-being. We'll touch on physical as well as mental health, physiology, emotions, women's health, spiritual well-being, goddesses, and self-development in the fullest sense. Listening to another story can change ours, so thank you for showing up, and let's begin this journey together. Hey everyone! So today is another solo, and it's about burnout, anxiety, depression, and how trauma can exacerbate it or make us predisposed, so to speak, to burnout, because it's the name itself doesn't really allude to what the physiological processes are. It makes us very disempowered to do anything about it, and it kind of leaves it up to us to deal with just stress. But stress is such a broad term. It doesn't really empower us. So I want to discuss what the causes and contributing factors are, the symptoms, because that way you can figure out if that's what it is, and how it's really high among health professionals due to their work and associated psychological stresses from an organization that does not give them support, but also that it's something that everyone goes through. So teachers, single parents, traders, managers, bankers, entrepreneurs, many people are suffering from burnout now, and it doesn't just have to be huge workloads that cause burnout. It can be just the fact that as a single parent, for example, you have to constantly make decisions from the moment you may wake up till the time you go to sleep. So you're never really at rest, and that goes on into the night. So I personally have had 2 burnouts in my life, and both times, well, the first time I didn't know it was a burnout. I thought it was all sorts of symptoms, and it kind of went on for about 3 years because I didn't know what I was dealing with. And in the end, I had lots of tests done. I went to internists, I went to different doctors, gynecologists, everything. And in the end, I was just being told it was in my head. I had depression. There was something wrong with me because all my levels were right. And I think I've pointed this out many times before, but I just want to stress it again, is that those levels, the range, is so huge that we can be in between that range and still be way off our normal range. Okay, so just take it with a pinch of salt when you get those results from a normal GP. Try and go to a functional medical doctor, which are doctors that actually look at the whole system. So the functioning of your endocrine, the psych, the neurology, and the biology, and then the microbiome of the gut and the brain. And they look at toxins and things. It's much more thorough, and they really hone in. So I would suggest this for anyone who thinks they have burnout, as I'll discuss in a minute why. Okay, so studies have shown that women are much more likely to suffer from burnout, up to 20 to 60% more than men. And they report that they suffer from emotional exhaustion, whereas men often suffer more from depersonalization. And people who've experienced trauma are much more likely to experience burnout. Okay, so you're more susceptible because your resilience to stress is just lower. Okay, so burnout is further impacted by work-related stresses such as perfectionism, workload, work hours, increased responsibilities and tasks, lack of autonomy or control, financial stress, career stress, loss of meaning and joy in your work, having children at home and probably the associated emotions such as guilt and shame, work-life integration, decreased support, real or perceived lack of fairness in promotion and compensation, gender bias, gender discrimination, and sexual harassment. So it's both an organizational and a personal problem. And that's why a one-size-fits-all approach isn't enough, especially if you're being told from the organization that it's psychological stress. It just doesn't give you a handle to do anything about it. It leaves you so toolless and clueless. So the part you can own is our own part. How do we contribute to it? By our lifestyle, and we can look at underlying disruptors to our health and see what we need to remove from our lives to live well. So part of that is knowing that burnout is a physiological imbalance, adrenal fatigue, okay? So that even some doctors, especially the functional doctors, they admit this is a condition, whereas a lot of conventional doctors, because there's not enough studies being done, so we can't say what range that would be. It hasn't been classified yet, and it hasn't been described yet as a physical condition or physiological condition. But when you know it's adrenal fatigue, you can work out what do your adrenals need, because they're pretty much the basis of the whole endocrine system. Okay, when they're out of whack, because they regulate our the hormones from the adrenals regulate our sleep and wake cycles and everything else that is associated to sleep and waking, which is everything, your whole life. So when we know it's adrenal fatigue, we can support ourselves physically, physiologically, emotionally, mentally, and psychologically. So then we have a handle on it. So what are the causes, apart from what I said, associated to work? Are autoimmune conditions, viruses, bacterial infections, accidents, injuries, emotional stress, excessive exercise, food intolerance, which has to do with allergies and later forms into autoimmune conditions, microbiome dysfunction, so the gut health, and toxins. Okay, so these we can work on. So what are the symptoms? Why maybe you think you have burnout, you're probably pretty sure, but then you think, well, I don't work that hard, or whatever it is, that you think it's not that, because it's being portrayed as just overachiever's condition. So symptoms can be slow in the morning, fatigue in the afternoon, and then a second wind of energy in the evening. So I have a lot of that. Fatigue and disturbed sleep, so you're exhausted, you go to bed, but you just can't fall asleep easily, and when you do sleep you wake up multiple times, which just often makes you even more tired in the morning. Moodiness and brain fog, obviously, if the sleep cycle is disturbed, the brain function is not optimal. You get afternoon headaches, and we start to crave salty and sugary foods because we want to get that energy level up at the right times, so in the day. Dizziness and blood sugar issues, weight gain or weight loss, so it can be both. Low libido, hair loss, dark skin around the eyes, so it looks a bit like darkish brown, and in the beginning it's just part of the eyelids and around the sides of the eyes, but then it can come around all the eyes and you look like a raccoon. And then even the skin starts to discolor, or there's patches. Weak nails and brittle hair. Can you hear all the beautiful birds? So I thought, because we're talking about burnout, I'd go sit in a beautiful setting with the birds and the bees outside. Dizziness, I think I said that already. And so another thing is, obviously all this has come from something else, which is digestive issues. So bloating, fatigue after eating, chronic inflammation, low immunity to infection, which all point to gut health. And this gut health affects brain health. Yeah, so when you have brain fog, there's usually either leaky gut, so the blood-brain barrier is weakened. And then foods such as wheat, especially when it's processed, it easily moves through this barrier, and so it can go direct to the brain, where it just becomes like a glue in the brain, and that's why we can't think straight. So, and this leads obviously to anxiety and depression, because you really haven't got that clarity, and there's more of a sense of lack of control. And when there's too much anxiety, at one point you just can't deal with it, and so you switch off, withdraw, and go into a depressed state. So often this is treated in conventional medicine with antidepressants, or just telling you to stress less or rest more, which sometimes is really too hard when the nervous system is already on high and the endocrine system is not regulating well, and you can't get that sufficient deep sleep. So the things we can do to overcome burnout is first get tests done, proper tests. So go to a doctor who goes a little deeper, not just the simple tests that you have to ask for 100 times before and they want to know why. Just a functional medical doctor is the best, but sometimes you can't find them in your area. So really probe and find out how you can get microbiome labs and what's it called? Methylene, I think. Methylene lab tests. Okay? And then minimize stress. Okay, so have a look, journal about it even, or just look at your life. Write down work, family, home, personal, private, and all the areas of your life. And from a 1 to 10, which one causes you more stress? So maybe there's a few that cause you a lot of stress. And then find out why for each one. And then create a schedule to minimize the stress in those areas. So how can you avoid that person or that place at that time? Or how can you deal with them better if it's a relationship thing? Is it the communication? What needs are not being met of yours? So obviously always it's a factor of needs not being met, and that's what causes stress, emotional stress. And understand first what your needs are before you can communicate that you're missing something. Okay, create a schedule to minimize that stress and find more rest within that area of your life. How can you find more rest within the family or within your work? Okay, so try and go with the grain. Also, if you're a woman, looking at our menstrual cycles, honoring the times of fallow. So when we have our periods, just rest a bit more, take a 20-minute nap in the afternoon. Tell your kids to go do their own thing. Put them on the iPad if that's what you need, just to have that moment of rest. Don't feel guilty about it. Creating a schedule. So meditation and samavriti. Meditation, you can download an app or just do 5 minutes of breathing, just focusing on the breath and letting it be 5 in, 5 out. Very slow counting, and that will help you feel much better and calm down. So that will help you deal with the stress, and you can do that 2-3 times a day just to regulate yourself. Okay, and then decrease inflammation. So inflammation is caused by eating too much sweet, sour and salty food, all of which raise the pH levels so that we have more acidity, and that acidity causes inflammation. It's like excess fire in the body. So how do we dampen that fire? With foods that are bitter and astringent. So astringent is something like a raw banana or raspberries, what else? Pomegranate, things like that pull together. Not lemon, which is sour again. And then curcuma is really good. It helps to actually reduce inflammation, and it's even shown to help in people who have depression. So when they use curcuma daily, it really helps to bring down that inflammation in the body. Okay, which again brings down our allergies, reduces our imbalance in the gut microbiome, because that's also aggravated by too much sweet, sour, processed foods. Okay, and leafy greens, that also helps to reduce inflammation, and it helps to regulate the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. This is a really important axis for that circadian rhythm, so our day-night rhythm, the sleeping, the waking up with cortisol and going to sleep with melatonin. So sometimes we've been out of balance, out of whack, I wanted to say, out of balance too long, And then this HPA axis just doesn't function well anymore. They've been miscommunicating for so long, it becomes a pattern. And so you really have to help it with all these things. What else can you do? Eat protein-rich foods. Adrenals need lots of proteins because your adrenals make cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. They also make a hormone called DHEA. We talked about it very briefly with Andrea Trank last week. And so what does DHEA do? It lowers your cortisol, so it's inversely proportional. When DHEA goes down, cortisol goes up, and the inverse. And it's only created by your ovaries and your adrenals. So for women especially, okay, for everyone, the DHEA becomes less and less after age of 20. You really notice a decline, and as you get to 40, much more, and so on and so forth. So to increase our protein helps to keep that level up optimally for our age. You can also take DHEA replacement hormones, but again, they have been tested on men that are 70 kilos, white, Caucasian, between the ages 25 and 35, healthy. So what they need is obviously different what a woman needs who's unhealthy or feeling unwell. So I would first get a recommendation from your doctor about that, because any hormone replacement is a good option, but it's the last option you want to go for. Try natural first, obviously. So what else does DHEA do, which is really important because this is a hormone hardly ever talked about, but for women it's really important because it improves stress resilience and recovery, improves the libido, our immunity, our sleep, our energy, and our mood. So you can imagine how that would help us cope emotionally in all these areas of our life. Okay, so again, thinking about eating rich protein foods, okay, because then our adrenals can convert the proteins into the hormones for a healthy endocrine system and function, and this will relieve insomnia, anxiety, and mental fatigue. Okay, that's number 4. And number 5 is healthy fats. So eat lots of healthy fats. Has nothing to do with cholesterol. Healthy fats actually reduce the bad cholesterol. So olive oil, coconut oil, ghee, and avocados are really good for healthy fats. I'm here just mentioning everything that is, vegetarian, because I'm a vegetarian, but you can add salmon and meats to this, also for the proteins. Eating meat, I don't eat meat, but eggs are a good option, and that's why I like to use ghee, because it's very strong in protein as well. What else? Supplements and herbs. So zinc is really important. It's also essential for your immunity. So if you have a low immunity, always getting infections, or every cold and flu that comes along, you need zinc. Zinc has also been shown to help people with major depression, schizophrenia. It helps us, it improves our sense of smell. And so in the COVID time, it's really important. You can take up to 22 milligrams a day. That's what I've been doing the last few months, and it's really helping me also sleep better. Vitamin D, so getting out in the sun at least 10 to 15 minutes, really getting the sun on your skin is helpful. Chamomile, ashwagandha, these all help with burnout. So now I'm going to read something from a book. So this book was recommended to me by Stephanie Munoz, who was on a few weeks back. And it's called Wintering. It's written by Catherine May. And I think it's a very vivid, lucid, insightful, and beautifully written book. I haven't got to the end yet, but there's some things I'd like to share with you that's in here. Winter had begun. Everyone winters at one time or another. Some winter over and over again. Wintering is a season in the cold. It is a fallow period in life when you're cut off from the world, feeling rejected, sidelined, blocked from progress, or cast into the role of an outsider. Perhaps it results from illness, perhaps from a life event such as the bereavement or the birth of a child. Perhaps it comes from a humiliation or failure. Perhaps you're in a period of transition and you have temporarily fallen between two worlds. Some winterings creep up upon us more slowly, accompanying the protracted death of a relationship, the drip, drip, drip of lost confidence. Some are appallingly sudden, like discovering one day that your skills are considered obsolete. The company you worked for has gone bankrupt, or your partner is in love with someone new. However it arrives, wintering is usually involuntary, lonely, and deeply painful. Yet it's also inevitable. We like to imagine that it's possible for life to be one eternal summer, and that we have uniquely failed to achieve that for ourselves. We dream of an equatorial habitat forever close to the sun, an endless, unvarying high season. But life's not like that. Emotionally, we're prone to stifling summers and low, dark winters, to sudden drops in temperature, to light and shade. Even if, by some extraordinary stroke of self-control and good luck, we were able to keep control of our own health and happiness for an entire lifetime, we still couldn't avoid the winter. Our parents would age and die. Our friends would undertake minor acts of betrayal. The machinations of the world would eventually weigh against us. Somewhere along the line, we would screw up. Winter would quietly roll in. All the careful preparations that animals make to endure the cold, foodless months, hibernation, migration, deciduous trees dropping leaves, this is no accident. The change that takes place in winter are a kind of alchemy, an enchantment performed by ordinary creatures to survive. It's all very well to survive the abundant months of spring and summer, but in winter we witness the full glory of nature flourishing in lean times. Plants and animals don't fight the winter. They don't pretend it's not happening and attempt to carry on living in the same lives that they lived in the summer. They prepare, they adapt, they perform extraordinary acts of metamorphosis to get them through. Winter is a time of withdrawing from the world, maximizing scant resources, carrying out acts of brutal efficiency and vanishing from sight. But that's where the transformation occurs. Winter is not the death of the life cycle, but its crucible. Here is another truth about wintering. You'll find wisdom in your winter, and once it's over, it's your responsibility to pass it on. And in return, it's our responsibility to listen to those who have wintered before us. It's an exchange of gifts in which nobody loses out. This may involve the breaking of a lifelong habit, passed down carefully through generations, that of looking at other people's misfortunes and feeling certain that they have brought it upon themselves in a way that you never would. This isn't just an unkind attitude. It does harm because it stops us from learning that disaster happens and how to adapt when it does. It stops us from reaching out to people who are suffering. And when our own disaster comes, it forces us into a humiliated retreat as we try to hunt down mistakes that we have made in the first place, or wrong-headed attitudes that we never held. Either that, or we become certain that there must be someone out there we can blame. Watching winter and really listening to its messages, we learn that effect is often disproportionate to the cause, that tiny mistakes can lead to huge disasters, that life is often bloody unfair, but it carries on happening with or without our consent. We learn to look kindly on other people's crises because they are so often portents of our own future. So that are just two parts of this book, and it's I recommend it to people because it's just a very healing, easy to read book, huge letters, so when you've got tired eyes it's still easy to read, and it just makes us feel less guilty about our situation. It makes it relative, and you can really relate to many of those things if you're going through or you've been through a burnout. And she describes it beautifully, and how her son and her both go through a dark time together. And that's a beautiful, and like she says, a necessary thing. We have to go through the winters, and if we don't allow ourselves to slow down with our periods or with the winter season, then we will get a big tidal wave of wintering in the form of a burnout. So there's a reason these burnouts are increasing, is because we are just living on high constantly, ignoring the night time by turning on our lights and TVs and screens. So all these things don't help, and this is not to make, I'm not saying this to make anyone feel guilty, but there are things we can change in our lives. Coming back to nature and living in tune with the cycles of ourselves and of the planet and the other species. I think it's a big beckoning, basically, this burnout, for all of us to take a good look. The same with COVID. I believe it's just a big wake-up call for us all to have a look seriously at what we're doing and why. So my dear, lovely, beautiful people, I'm going to end here with this talk, and I am adding on something that Diana Tokaji, who was on about a month and a half ago on acute trauma. She's reading a part of her book, 6 Women in a Cell, and she wanted me to add this on, but I'd already posted her talk, so it's going to be added on to this because, like I said in the beginning of the burnout talk, trauma does predispose us, if we have trauma in the past, whatever trauma, big trauma, small trauma, to burnout, just because it's harder for us to deal with stress. Okay? So I hope you enjoy that as well as this. Much love to you all. Next week we'll have someone on. I haven't got a clue yet who. Much love.
Here's a tiny excerpt from 6 Women in a Cell. It's from Chapter 1, Baby. When I first see Baby, everything stops. She seems to have frozen in the middle of the cell, her feet so planted, if her eyelids didn't blink, I'd think she was standing dead. She's not like Alexa, who makes everything move. Alexa is water. She bubbles. She fills out the tan prison jumpsuit to perfection. Her black hair is French braided and tied with white toilet paper. After all our hair clips and rubber bands were confiscated, Alexa tells the painful story about her ex beating her up while laughing, and though it looks like any moment her smile could flip, it is laughing that's Alexa's mainstay. Baby is the opposite, dead serious. Even as she tells me her story, the only sign of life is in her eyes. They are brown and huge, as if yanked wide beyond her freckled face, their mad largeness alone keeping her upright. Each time Baby blinks, it is startling. Even breathing is a risk. How tempting to crack, curl to our own feet and bawl. I never learned her name, but I learned this. Baby, an 18-year-old senior in high school, who is at most 5 feet tall and shaped soft and round, was bullied by another girl and that girl's friends. Something mean was put on Facebook. Something mean spread around the school. They'd threatened her at the bus stop and cornered her in the hall. Baby had had it, and when she finally took a hand to her bully, in her words, that slap on her face felt so good. Once I started, I couldn't stop. 2 days later, the bully was in the hospital, and 3 police officers We're at baby's door. The urge comes over me to cross the cell and hold baby, let her cry against my own shaking chest. But I know better. I have 2 teens. Besides, we haven't met. I was simply slammed into the same cell, my long gray hair disheveled, my yoga pants dirt-stained from where the cops knocked me down on the corner of our lot. That was just an hour ago, and although I could easily be baby's grandmother, I am hardly reliable material for a hug. I give her the most hope-filled expression I can muster, although all I want to do is swear. I'm angry at everything that congealed to make baby victim to a nasty girl's hate. Had her parents cared? Did anyone have her back? Had she been totally alone with the daily assaults on her ego, her 2 inches of self-worth? Hurt begat poison, poison, rage, rage, violence. Such an obvious ancient equation. I'm so sorry this happened, I say to baby. I do not say the words to you, just this happened, this escalation with baby in the hot seat. Now she is standing so still I don't dare say more. Her future is yet to unfold, some of it dependent on the bully in the hospital and how well she recovers. Baby will be called to the commissioner in a few minutes. It's midnight. She's been here since morning. Time stops. The air hangs. We stand in the cold cell seeing each other. Our breath hunkers down to a hibernator's low and no one's ribs move. If we are still, none of this has happened, and the glaring fluorescents don't buzz with spite. We're just surprised, square dance partners, catty-cornered to each other, frozen under the same absence of sky. I don't ask her any more questions. I don't try to strategize, and I don't probe. Baby's owl eyes are tortured enough. I simply hope now and pray later she takes my face and keeps it.
So thank you for listening all the way to the end of the podcast. For those of you who don't know, I've also got a Facebook group which I forgot to plug in all these podcasts, and it's called Yoga for Emotional Empowerment and Health. So it's all about learning different tools for different emotions and understanding them in relation to Ayurvedic elements and principles, so you can really quickly self-regulate yourself. So weekly I do a live for 10, 15 to 20 minutes where I explain about different emotions, also anxiety and depression. So please join there, and I will put a link to the Facebook group in the notes. Website, I also have a lot of blogs and articles, resources that you can download, PDFs, which will help you deal better with emotional life and turn those emotions from a sea of emotions which you feel totally out of control in, to actually transforming your life and feeling empowered, feeling that you are alive and passionate, and that you understand what emotions are trying to tell you and how you can move with them rather than against them or suppressing them. Okay, much love to you and be well. See you next week, or hear from me next week in any case. Bye.